feel like anything the jury's going to see in that courtroom, we should all see. You shouldn't run from the truth. You shouldn't hide the truth, even if it makes somebody look guilty. So that part of the still work to be done.
Welcome back. This is the part of the program where I reveal something else you need to know. And tonight it's something that's creating a lot of buzz in a lot of places. Let's take a look. But it's an apparent false report. This is coming from Airmail, which has an article, The Eyes of a Killer, that is saying that Steve Goncalves, Kelly Goncalves' father, has indicated certain things about this story. He says it's all false. Let me read you first from the article. This is from the article that Steve Goncalves says is false. Yet Steve had been told that the two survivors had allegedly not only been awake while the killings had taken place, but they had heard everything. More astonishingly, his grand jury sources alleged that the two girls had been texting one another as the murderer methodically went from one room to the next. That is absolutely shocking. That the two survivors in that University of Idaho house were texting during the murders. But now we got a statement from the Goncalves' family. As is common in these situations, people try to make money off of the dead. It's a free world and people can write and say pretty much anything they want these days. Most of the time, my family and I just ignore the chatter and the noise, but lines have to be drawn somewhere. I was recently sent an article on Airmail by Howard Blum describing Kaylee apparently quoting me and completely making up a fictional story about FBI letters, etc. Mr. Blum recently has used the murders to get back into the spotlight, appearing on an NBC show as well as a book he's writing. He has reached out through our attorney several times to speak to us, but we have declined. I just want to make it very clear to the public that we have not spoken to Mr. Blum about the death of our daughter. In his article, he writes as if he were Mr. Goncalves and has gone through the tragedy of having a murdered daughter and what he's experienced and is still experiencing. There's nothing more grandstanding and a very, very poor attempt at getting attention. The piece is obviously fictional, but written in poor taste. The Goncalves family would ask that everyone please respect the victims of this tragedy and continue to support trustworthy journalism. So if you're seeing these articles flash across your news feed that the girls were texting each other, the two survivors in that house, while their four friends were getting murdered, it did not come from Steve Goncalves. He says it is all fiction, a false report.
Shannon, my lawyer, told her job is to get everyone to forget. Her job is to stretch this out so long that the witnesses don't even remember what happened or they're not crisp on that stand. So,
in court on Wednesday, you and your wife, Christy, were visibly upset. That must have been a really tough hearing to come out of.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit used to the delays and the tactics that are being used.
more details I did not expect to hear, and they're kind of confusing, I'll be honest with you. The story that the surviving roommates tell in these documents is that they actually saw Xana. They saw her lying down in her room, so the door had to have been open. All this time, we've all been imagining that Xana and Ethan were behind a locked door, and that's why no one could get to them, and thought there must be something wrong. We'll call 911. Was this a surprise to you to hear this detail?
Yeah. I actually talked to Hunter a little bit back very beginning, and I remember him saying something about the doors, and I, not knowing the details, thought he was speaking of the outside door. So now, now looking back, I said, oh, the door being open, he was referring to the bedroom door, not that outside door, because there was reports of the outside door being open. And I was like, okay, so that's true. That's how you can get things wrong. Somebody tells you the door's open and you assume it's the front door, and it was actually the bedroom door. So
I'll add to the last part there, just because it's at the front end of my mind. We're not 100% sure if the door was unlocked, but there was no damage to anything, and the door was still open when we got there.
Oh, I know when I was 19, I made some stupid, crazy decisions that make no reflection on the person I am today, because I just didn't have life experience. So I give the same grace to anybody who's probably under the age of 25, to be honest, especially for guys. I know girls start making more logical decisions earlier in life than at least I did, but I know guys can.
And let's go ahead and start with the first one. And give me just a second to pull this up so we're looking at the same thing together at the same time. So there are what I'm going to call basically 7 critical facts that were reported that are either new or there's more information about them, things that really matter. The first is that according to the article, Steve Goncalves was talking privately to an FBI agent who was hiding it. So this is what the article said, but not all of Steve's investigative efforts have been in vain. He had assembled a retinue of blue chip sources that, he revealed to several friends, included an FBI agent in the St. Louis office who had shared his personal email so that his bosses in the bureau wouldn't learn that he was communicating with Steve. A handful of additional sympathetic law enforcement officers, and then I'm going to leave the next one for my next point. So according to this, there was actually an FBI agent communicating directly with the father, that he was having one-on-one conversations with him, and knowing that that would be looked on with disfavor by his boss, he was doing it privately with his personal email. So that's pretty important information. It, you would think, would only come from an inside source, because who else would know about it? It could, of course, have serious ramifications for the FBI agent, who could get in trouble if anyone found out about that. So now the second really important fact, I'm going to dwell on this a little bit. I'm going to give you every place where the article talks about it so you can kind of evaluate it for yourself. But the second thing is the suggestion, the statement that Steve Goncalves had grand jury sources that he learned from people who had spoken to grand jurors. It's not really clear that he talked directly to them. So we'll get into that. And let me show you what the different statements are right here in this one we're already looking at. And most helpful of all, a conduit to 2 of the grand jurors who have been on the panel that have voted to indict Brian Kohberger. Now, it doesn't say that Steve Goncalves spoke directly to the grand jurors, but it says he had a conduit. In other words, someone who was talking to 2 of the grand jurors, or at least 2 people who claimed to be the grand jurors. And in the process, he had compiled some startling revelations. So that's the first thing that's said about his contact with the grand jury. Now, the second one, I'm pulling this out from the article so you can understand what the allegations are about communications with the grand jury. Even more troubling, if true, was what Steve had learned from people who had spoken to members of the grand jury who had been presented with the prosecution's case. It centered on the alleged behavior of the two roommates who had miraculously survived the night unscathed. And I'll go ahead and read. How, he wondered, could they have slept blissfully unaware through the savage pre-dawn stabbing murders of 4 people in a narrow house with paper-thin walls? So notice here what it says about the communication is that he learned from people who spoke to members of the grand jury. Again, not a direct communication that he had with someone with the grand jury, but there was someone or some group of people in between. That's the insinuation here. And then we'll go to the 4th one. Yet Steve had been told that the 2 survivors allegedly had not only been awake while the killings had taken place, but that they had heard everything. More astonishingly, his grand jury sources alleged that the 2 girls had been texting one another as the murderer methodically went from one room to the next. So again, talking about grand jury sources, and this time it calls them his grand jury sources, but there's no statement that he communicated directly with the grand jury. And I think that's relevant because of what some of the claims have been, what some of the media sensation has been about.
Kohberger's attorney Ann Taylor said he stood silent to preserve his right to challenge the indictment. But the information the defense is using to support their claims is sealed. A hearing on that motion is closed to the public this Thursday, an incredibly rare occurrence in a criminal case. So what could possibly happen at that hearing?
I would imagine that there is going to be evidence presented, whether that is through documentary evidence, witnesses, and live testimony, right? But when you have a motion of this nature, it's not something that the defense can just theorize about, right? And to make this argument and to ask the court to make the ruling to ultimately dismiss the indictment in this case, it can't be theoreticals and it can't be hypotheticals. I would imagine that the defense has to have some real concrete evidence to show this is what happened, Judge, or these series of things are what happened. And this is why this indictment cannot stand. I mean, this in my mind is not a case this motion is not a situation where it can just be legal theory and argument. You're going to have to present to the judge some absolute concrete evidence, testimony, and otherwise to convince the judge there is something that occurred that warrants the dismissal that the defense is seeking in this case.
So the third matter that I think is really important in terms of what he says, you've already seen, which is that the roommates were awake, that they heard everything, and that they were texting each other. we'll get into that another day, because honestly, that's an entire video to talk about what the significance of that would be for the case. But that was the third issue I thought was raised in the article that was new.
Shocking new revelations in the brutal murders of 4 Idaho college students last fall. A new report claims the 2 roommates who survived the massacre were awake and texting each other while their 4 friends were stabbed to death one by one. This new revelation reportedly coming from grand jurors on the case and leaked to family members. Now, the only suspect, Brian Kohberger, is still awaiting trial. According to the probable cause filing, one surviving roommate says she witnessed the killer, described as having, quote, bushy eyebrows, walking past her and then out of the home. Prosecutors say they do have Kohberger's DNA found on a knife sheath left under one of the victims, and the judge has entered a not guilty plea on Kohberger's behalf. Let's bring in Misty Maris, legal analyst and trial attorney. Misty, thank you so much for your time. So this is a new twist. It allegedly comes from grand jurors in the case, but no one is going on record. What was your initial reaction to this potential bombshell?
As far as this is concerned, it's really difficult to verify whether this information is actually true. So let's go through a little bit of the history of the case. When the news first broke about this terrible, tragic killing, we learned that there were 2 roommates who survived the attacks who were in the house at the time. Now, at first we heard that they were both asleep. They didn't wake up till the following day. Then hits the probable cause affidavit. Well, the story begins to change. One of the roommates now had this encounter where she sees the assailant in the house that evening. So this is a dramatic change from the information that was set forth in that probable cause affidavit, if it were in fact the case that the 2 roommates were awake and texting during that time. So what does it mean for the case? Well, that would certainly be contemporaneous evidence relayed in those text messages as to what the 2 roommates heard and saw that night. Now, again, we haven't verified whether or not this is true, and we likely won't know until the trial actually unfolds. But it would certainly be a game changer for the prosecution.
Well, it certainly would, Misty. And we know that there is, a gag order in this case. That's, a fact that we need to remember. So what happens if someone keeps leaking information, whether or not it's true, and even if they're doing it anonymously?
If the leaker is a grand juror, there are very, very strict rules about what grand juries can say in the public sphere. Now, those rules change jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but Idaho has a similar rule to New York. Grand jurors are not allowed to speak to anybody about the evidence that they see in the courtroom, about the deliberations as far as coming to that conclusion of actually coming back with an indictment. So this would all be completely off limits if, in fact, a grand juror was leaking this information. And there could be serious repercussions. It could be contempt of court. It could put the whole indictment at issue, depending on the nature of the communication. So that is certainly a problem. The gag order is really far and really expansive with respect to the prosecution, the defense, and any statements made or evidence that comes into the public sphere. So yes, there are very serious repercussions as far as contempt of court type charges and even jail time that could be associated with that. Now, that being said, anonymous leakers are sometimes, number one, difficult to verify and sometimes difficult to identify. So it truly depends on the nature of the communication and whether or not that person can actually be tracked down. But keep in mind, anything that comes out in the public outside of the courtroom could potentially find its way into the trial, depending on how this happens and how the information has come to light.
No.
So the other surprising detail that just gave me a lot of pause was the fact that the girls were all upstairs in Kaylee's room talking. The roommates, Bethany and Dylan and Maddie and Kaylee, at 2 o'clock in the morning. They'd all been out. They'd all come back, except Xana hadn't come back yet with Ethan. And they were all talking, as college kids do. Night is still young at 2 a.m. And they were thinking of going back out again, going back out to maybe go to the food truck and get, another round of late night food.
2 a.m. is a dark hour. I can tell you that. We're all.
And I just was sort of gobsmacked by this moment of how possibly things could have been different. Have you gone over this sort of theory in your mind?
You know what? I have, but it's hard I can't go there really. I don't try to think of all the what ifs. What I try to think is what's the positive aspect of this? And to me, it makes that timeline that much tighter. It proves that DM was in the house, sent a text to the same driver that Kaylee used, which is a friend of the house that they've all used. It backs up all these narratives and things that I know to be factual. And it helps put another piece in the puzzle. And that's one thing I've always said is if you're innocent, you want the evidence to come out because the evidence is going to prove it's not going to fit you. You're going to be able to be like, well, they got all this evidence. I'm innocent, so it's not going to fit me. So let's just rip through this evidence and figure out where I can say that's not me. But in this case, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get everything tossed out because every piece of information, whether it's DM contacting the driver and saying, hey, are you still around? Which backs up a story that, let's be honest, the 19-year-old didn't know they're going to go through her phone. They're going to track it. There was this CAS system. They're going to go all through this house, know when they went upstairs, went downstairs. They didn't know any of this. And they're not talking about cleaning up a
And I just was sort of gobsmacked by this moment of how possibly things could have been different. Have you gone over this sort of theory in your mind?
You know what? I have, but it's hard I can't go there really. I don't try to think of all the what ifs. What I try to think of is what's the positive aspect of this? And to me, it makes that timeline that much tighter. It proves that DM was in the house, sent a text to the same driver that Kaylee used, which is a friend of the house that they've all used. It backs up all these narratives and things that I know to be factual. And it helps put another piece in the puzzle. And that's one thing I've always said is if you're innocent, you want the evidence to come out because the evidence is going to prove it's not going to fit you. You're going to be able to be like, well, they got all this evidence. I'm innocent, so it's not going to fit me. So let's just rip through this evidence and figure out where I can say that's not me. But in this case, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get everything tossed out because every piece of information, whether it's DM contacting the driver and saying, hey, are you still around? Which backs up a story that, let's be honest, the 19-year-old didn't know they're going to go through her phone. They're going to track it. There was this CAS system. They're going to go all through this house, know when they went upstairs, went downstairs. They didn't know any of this. And they're not talking about cleaning up a
Well, did Hunter tell you that he was able to open the door to Xana's room and witness Xana and Ethan in there?
He told me that he went to the door and he was trying to go through that door and he was trying to figure out what was going on in there. It's kind of like what you're hearing with that audio. He announced himself. He said, hey, I'm here. What's going on? But they didn't respond. and he went in there, he seen something, and I think around 2:15.
Well, did Hunter tell you that he was able to open the door to Xana's room and witness Xana and Ethan in there?
He told me that he went to the door and he was trying to go through that door and he was trying to figure out what was going on in there.
You mentioned in a statement today that you think Hunter Johnson protected those girls. I mean, listen, I don't know what happened, but I'm trying to piece this together like a puzzle, and it sure feels like he knew something and he protected Bethany from knowing. Do you think that he went up to the third floor and may have seen what happened to Kaylee and Maddie and therefore said, get out, get out, get out, but did not tell Bethany and did not tell Dylan?
I talked to Hunter directly, and it sucks. He had a broken soul. Like, this is a man who's seen his best friend dead, like dying, like gone. Like, this is a community that doesn't know what murder is. They don't have any clue how to handle, public relations. It just doesn't really exist. You got to remember, there's blankets, there's covers, there's the bed. So this person, they could have totally been covered up to where you just flip that blanket over and then all of a sudden you run. Understand the impact of what really happened. They're not sleeping anymore. It is what it is.
One of America's best-selling authors is digging into the Idaho quadruple murder case. It's a case News Nation, particularly our Brian Enton, has led the way on reporting since the beginning.
We requested information from prosecutor Bill Thompson's office about his history with death penalty cases, but we were told that request was denied because of the Brian Kohberger gag order.
Then there were also comments that were made where he said, I don't feel confident, being asked about how he felt about law enforcement. He said, and that's why I push the envelope and say a little bit more. I hate to be that guy, but everybody has a job and a role to play. And this is my role as the parent. He also, as we all know, opposed very vigorously the gag order that was applied to family members as well as to attorneys and to other people who might be witnesses in the case. His attorney tried to get clarification and even appealed it. But Goncalves says this he didn't say. This is what he says. I'm going to show you his denial and where he says, no, this isn't what I said. This is his response to the article that we just talked about in the statements that he supposedly made. He says, as it is common in these situations, people try to make money off of the dead. It's a free world, and people can write and say pretty much anything they want these days. Most of the time, my family and I just ignore the chatter and the noise, but lines have to be drawn somewhere. I was recently sent an article on Airmail by Howard Blum describing Kaylee, apparently quoting me and completely making up a fictional story about FBI letters, etc. So notice what he says there. He says he wasn't quoted. And I will say this, I think as you could see in what I went through, it isn't clear that he's actually being quoted. Instead, it seems to be, it easily could have been that someone else talked to the reporter about what Steve said or did. For example, the text messages they say that the author says he has. We don't know those came directly from Steve. They could have come from some other way. And notice he says here that it's a fictional story about the FBI letters. I think they only mentioned one, but the story about the FBI writing a letter saying you can't contact this person, he's saying that's fictional, not true. He says, Mr. Blum recently has used the murders to get back into the spotlight, appearing on an NBC show as well as a book he is writing. He has reached out through our attorney several times to speak to us, but we have declined. I just want to make it very clear to the public that we have not spoken to Mr. Blum about the death of our daughter. In his article, he writes as if he were Mr. Goncalves and has gone through the tragedy of having a murdered daughter and what he has experienced and is still experiencing. And I will say it is written from the sense of how he would feel, what he would think, which could just be projection by the author, but the line is a little blurry there. This is nothing more than grandstanding in a very, very poor attempt at getting attention. This piece is obviously fictional, but written in poor taste. The Goncalves family would ask that everyone please respect the victims of this tragedy and continue to support trustworthy journalism. And so in the airmail, and I'll go ahead and wait on that. So they did want to make a specific point that in that article that we just talked about, it does say airmail reached out to Steve for comment, but Steve's attorney said neither he nor his client can comment due to a gag order.
A murder scene. They're not talking about what do we got to do. They're literally just girls being girls, sitting on a bed, talking, laughing, talking about let's go get some food. Let's not go to bed. It's 2 a.m. Let's go have some more fun. And I'm sure they were very close to doing just that. And it's unfortunately they didn't. But on the one side it makes that house a little bit clearer and people know a little bit more what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, the what ifs are hard on this scenario as well because it's 2 a.m. And if they'd gone back out to the food truck, they might have been back by 3 or 3:30. And this monster, his timeline was 4 a.m. So it may not have made a difference, but it is just sort of an alarming thought that there was an idea to maybe leave the house. And who knows what might have happened.
Yeah, there's so much intrigue in this 6 or 8 hours that nobody called anybody. Perhaps there was something that we don't know about yet. Perhaps they were drinking, or not to impugn their integrity, but were they intoxicated on drugs or alcohol or something? That makes a lot more sense than this woman sees this attacker, or at least a stranger, in her house with a mask on, drives or walks by, and she does nothing for the better part of 6 or 8 hours. That makes no sense, and quite honestly, may well be fodder for the defense, because defense attorneys just look for anything to suggest an inexplicable event.
The fourth is that there was, according to what Steve Goncalves thought, there was an informant. He felt like law enforcement had an informant. And this is what the article says. And I'll start. And in that, he talks about looking for answers. And in that dogged process, he, meaning Steve, came to believe that the government must have a protected source, an informant who could provide testimony that would tighten the screws that held together the case against Kohberger. Steve was determined to talk to them. He did not want to wait for the trial to get the knowledge he needed. For his peace of mind, he needed relief now. So the article is saying that Steve Goncalves came to believe that there was an informant, a person talking to law enforcement who had put together the case for them, had linked the murders to Kohberger. Now, we don't know anything about that person. That hasn't been included in the probable cause information. It hasn't been leaked to the media. No one in the public is talking about it. So there's no evidence of that. And so this is something that would be different, that would not come from the normal sources within the government or from the state. This would be something new and different. And there's a really strange statement next that but before he can make his move, in other words, to talk to this informant, as you just read, according to the article, he wanted to talk to them. Before he could get in a room and have a heart-to-heart talk with the witness, he was unexpectedly stopped in his tracks by the FBI. The Bureau had sent an official letter to Steve's attorney in Moscow, Shannon Gray, warning that if there were any attempt to contact the individual Steve had been pursuing, there would be legal consequences.
So the other surprising detail that just gave me a lot of pause was the fact that the girls were all upstairs in Kaylee's room talking. You know, the roommates, Bethany and Dylan and Maddie and Kaylee, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd all been out. They'd all come back, except Xana hadn't come back yet with Ethan.
Let's be honest, the 19-year-old didn't know they're going to go through her phone. They're going to track it. There was this CAS system. They're going to go all through this house. Know when they went upstairs, went downstairs. They didn't know any of this. And they're not talking about cleaning up a murder scene. They're not talking about what do we got to do. They're literally just girls being girls, sitting on a bed, talking, laughing, talking about, let's go get some food. Let's not go to bed. It's 2 a.m. Let's go have some more fun. And I'm sure they were very close to doing just that. And it's unfortunately they didn't. But on the one side it makes that house a little bit clearer and people know a little bit more what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, the what ifs are hard on this scenario as well, because it's 2 a.m. And if they'd gone back out to the food truck, they might have been back by 3 or 3:30.
Like a quarter left? Yeah, I know.
You've learned that Maddie was killed first and then your daughter. What was the scenario that was laid out for you?
We wanted to know where she was at and how this happened as much as they would be able to share with us. And they said she was in bed, and we're like, her bed, and they're like, no. So we're like, Maddie, because that's not unusual. They crash out in our house all the time together. 4 or 5 of the girls sleep in the same bed. I don't know how they do it. But so we got those details, and then we just, kept asking, and, it's the last moments of your daughter's life, and you know that some of that information could be helpful to the case. So, you want to make sure that you know enough that you could be helpful if there was a certain thing in the room that was missing. Things like that. Do we have pictures that they don't have access to that, Maddie Mae's room, lays out like layouts of the room, if it changed, things like that. So yeah, we learned that they went for Maddie first.
And I mean, I just want a camera. I just want the truth. I just want everyone to see what's going on. That makes me radical. Okay.
Yeah, we learned that they went for Maddie first.
And the letter went on to make clear with an intimidating force the fact that Steve was the father of one of the victims gave him no dispensation from the legal consequences that accompany tampering with a government witness. Now, as I read that, I find that kind of confusing because I don't understand why Steve contacting an informant that he knew about would somehow compromise the protection of someone volunteering information. All I can assume is he shouldn't have even known who this was. So if he reached out to the person, they would know there was a leak within the law enforcement circles. And that's how Steve got the name and was able to go to them. That's the only thing I could think of. It seemed a little bit confusing as to exactly why the FBI would have a reason to write him. You're going to find out as soon as we get to his statement. Steve Goncalves says this is nonsense, no such letter. So don't assume that it's true. What we're doing right now is going through the 7 brand new things, or at least really important extra details that we got as part of what the article was. So the 6th thing that was discussed is the receipt for the Dickies long-sleeved work uniform. Let's talk about that. According to what supposedly Steve Goncalves learned from grand jurors, Kohberger had purchased a dark blue Dickies long-sleeved work uniform at the Walmart in Pullman, Washington, not long before the murders. The authorities had a copy, and I'm going to skip a little bit. The authorities had a copy of the $49.99 receipt, and they also now had a theory to explain how Kohberger had managed to escape from the crime scene without a scratch and without leaving an incriminating drop of blood in his getaway car.
There isn't something forensically like, I personally keep thinking, how did the killer get out the sliding door of the kitchen, get to the car, get into the car, get to wherever the dumping ground was to get rid of the bloody clothing, the knife, and all the other implements of the crime, and get back to an apartment, and if it's Kohberger's apartment, all without leaving a forensic trail that was, a beacon of blinking lights, because that didn't exist. And I keep wondering, what did that killer do to hide those tracks so well?
It's what if I said the killer actually wrote what he would do? Because Brian wrote a paper saying how he would go into a crime scene and not leave any evidence in that crime scene. So I think you just need to read what he wrote. He wrote exactly what he did, and he probably did more. Who knows what he learned in that Reddit post where he interviewed criminals that got caught or got away with different crimes. And, I believe he incorporated those into his night of action. So I think he came to that slider, opened it up whatever way he did, left it open, left some things outside at that slider, part of his kit, part of his plastic bag, whatever it was, went in, did his thing, was covered in a Dickie outfit from neck to toe, had this hood thing on that they also got that coming to his house. If you attack this guy, you wouldn't scratch him. You wouldn't be able to get your hands on him. The only place would be his eyes.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are following new developments out of Idaho, where a court filing in the case against Brian Kohberger is revealing some potentially bombshell DNA evidence. In the document that was filed last month and just unsealed yesterday, Kohberger's defense team reveals that there's a 3-person mixture in the DNA found underneath the left fingernail of victim Madison Mogan.
Tonight, a new curveball in the case against accused murderer Brian Kohberger. In a redacted court filing, his defense team says investigators recovered DNA from 3 unidentified individuals under the fingernails of victim Madison Mogan, who was stabbed to death along with Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin in an off-campus home at the University of Idaho. The defense arguing DNA test results were inconclusive and should be excluded at trial, saying it would mislead the jury. They also claim independent testing by the defense eliminated Kohberger.
Because police will often bag the hands of a murder victim, and for good reason. Because when people fight for their life, they will scratch and they will claw at their killer like their life depends on it.
But there isn't something forensically like, I personally keep thinking, how did the killer get out the sliding door of the kitchen, get to the car, get into the car, get to wherever the dumping ground was to get rid of the bloody clothing, the knife, and all the other implements of the crime, and get back to an apartment. And if it's Kohberger's apartment, all without leaving a forensic trail that was, a beacon of blinking lights, because that didn't exist. And I keep wondering, what did that killer do to hide those tracks so well?
It's what if I said the killer actually wrote what he would do? Because Brian wrote a paper saying how he would go into a crime scene and not leave any evidence in that crime scene. So I think you just need to read what he wrote. He wrote exactly what he did, and he probably did more. Who knows what he learned in that Reddit post where he interviewed criminals that got caught or got away with different crimes. And, I believe he incorporated those into his night of action. So I think he came to that slider, opened it up whatever way he did, left it open. Left some things out at that slider, part of his kit, part of his plastic bag, whatever it was.
All dressed, packing his little bag.
Went in, did his thing. Was covered in a Dickie outfit from neck to toe. Had this hood thing on that they also got that coming to his house. If you attack this guy, you wouldn't scratch him. You wouldn't be able to get your hands on him. The only place would be his eyes, and gloves on. I think people underestimate if you know what you're doing and you want to go in there and you got a mission and you've been planning it out.
So the 7th point is this one. For one thing, Steve, remains determined to make sure the authorities have arrested the right man.
And just a few more questions. Since Kohberger waived the speedy trial, I think we all thought maybe the trial was going to be really soon, and now it could be far away. I mean, how are you dealing with that? Are you still processing that? I mean, I feel for you guys having to continue to live in this weird legal limbo.
You give up all your notions of normal when something like this happens. And you hope that your community feels for you and embraces you, hugs you, and says, we're going to take care of this. You hope that your community says, we're here for you and we're going to make this right. And that's why I'm there, for them to have the vision and the cameras, and everybody needs to be in that room, because they're the ones that are wrapping their arms around me, Chrissy, and our children. They're saying, we're going to do, this is an outsider. He came here to hunt these dumb hillbillies and teach us about what he said was cloud computing and forensic. He thought he could come here and hunt dumb hillbillies and he could get away with this. And now that we have him caught, we need to be able to hold him accountable, and the community needs to be a part of that. And taking cameras out of there makes it a double standard. You can't say that they're accountable, yet they're not a part of it.
That was another thing that was always kind of hard for us, was we felt like we picked a really safe state in a safe community. We left the city in California where we'd be awoken in different times of the night with sirens and shootings and things. So, and then when this happened, I was like, who in Idaho would do this? Who would be capable of doing that in our community? And I remember talking to one of the officers, and he was like, you know what? We worried that this person had been given warnings, and, you know, he'd gone to various, you know, people call in and say, you know, my boyfriend's abusive. And he goes, a lot of times we've got to make determinations that they're safe. You know, sometimes it's exaggeration. Maybe somebody's had too much to drink. He goes, our worst fear, Steve, is that we let that person go. And he was truly a dangerous person, and we didn't recognize that. He goes, but if this person's an outsider, he goes, if they're not from this community, he goes, if they're from out of this state, he goes, we are going to bring it. We're going to bring it to this person if they came from out of this area to do this to our community. And I'm like, well, then that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping it's completely an outsider, so everybody knows that he didn't have to do this. This is a decision making that he did, and he picked the wrong community. And I had officers that were willing to go that extra mile, and that extra being offended to know that somebody thought that these cops were too small, they wouldn't be able to understand, he could out-trick them, outsmart them. You know, it was a strategic move that somebody would do if they came from outside the community and then came to our community to do this. And I felt very confident that those officers would take that personal, and it wouldn't be like in a big city where they were like, this happens every weekend, you know, they're overwhelmed, where this is like, this will change all those officers' lives. And I think you can see that when you go, there's a sense of purpose in their eyes. And
while he has grown increasingly convinced that Kohberger was involved in the crime, Steve remains open to the possibility that others might also have been involved, according to texts provided to Airmail. Well, that's a bombshell, because up until now, the prosecution certainly has suggested that Brian Kohberger did this alone, that no one else was involved. So this is suggesting that the father of one of the victims thinks maybe not. Maybe there were other people. It seems to him, it says quite possible that there were more perpetrators. So he is not convinced that the state has all of the people arrested properly.
The community needs to determine who this individual is. You cannot ask for the community to do the death penalty without their vision, without their support, without their understanding of all the aspects of the case. It's more than just the jury member.
So it was clear that he had not spoken directly to Steve from the article. But notice, let's go back to this. Notice what Steve Goncalves said was fictional. He said the FBI letters were fictional. And he said that he seemed to say that a lot of it was false, but he did not specifically state that he did not talk either to grand jurors or in a roundabout way to grand jurors. He did not specifically deny that. He did specifically deny that FBI letter. He said that's fictional. And he wanted to make it really clear that he has not in any way violated the gag order by talking to the media or sending information directly to this reporter. So I think he was being very clear that I know what my rules are, and I've followed and obeyed my rules. Now, here is the statement that Blum made. This is the reporter who wrote the article. He said, one, I have no wish to get into a public argument with Mr. Goncalves. He and his family have already suffered too much pain. Two, we both agree on that I never interviewed him, as the article clearly states. And three, my portrait of a grieving father was based on a trove of texts he wrote that were made available to airmail, his public statements, and interviews with people close to him. So now you have sort of the universe, the picture of what was said in the article and what Steve Goncalves' take on that was, and then what the take from the reporter was. But now let's take a look. Let's look at the question of what would this mean? What does this mean for Goncalves? What does it mean for the grand juror if a grand juror talked to him? What does it mean for the case? Is this significant? Is it small? What does it matter? So let's start with for Goncalves or the grand juror. Now, at this point, and I'll go ahead and pull that out for now. At this point, let me just sort of describe the grand jury process, because if what happened is true, then that's not how things are supposed to work. A grand juror should not be talking to a family member about what happened within the grand jury. Now, the way a grand jury works in general is that the judge is present as the jury members are impaneled, but the judge isn't present as the prosecutor presents evidence. The defendant isn't present. The defendant's lawyer isn't present. The attorneys for the witnesses are not present. The only people who are present are the grand jurors, the prosecutor, and whoever is testifying or talking to them about evidence. That's who's present.
I will sit here. I will speak to every single microphone, every single camera before I go to court and after I go to court. If you force me to do it, I'd rather the courtroom speak for itself than me. I don't want to speak. I'm actually quite a private man. But if you force me to protect my daughter, then I will speak at every moment that I have.
In the statement, Steve, it says that the case is surrounded by secrecy. Can you elaborate on that a little more? Like what you guys meant by that?
I've talked with multiple family members, and I want to be respectful for everybody's viewpoint. And there is some fear that the cameras will record things that are gross. You know, they're not ready to have their friends and family members come to them and say, hey, did you hear about this or that? And I understand that. I really do. So they come to me, and I reflect what they're saying. I absorb it, and then I also tell them from a legal perspective, from my lawyer counsel, it's hard to really argue what a camera is going to be in a courtroom negatively. You know, like, we're here asking for somebody in the community to judge this individual. So let's just hang it out there. Let's show every aspect and every fact that I feel is a fact. The community should agree that that is a fact, whether it's DNA or whatever it is.
So this is a really different sort of process. It isn't a trial. No one goes to jail based on the grand jury's decision. The grand jury is only deciding whether or not there is cause, probable cause, for the prosecutor to take this to a trial jury and then to have the trial jury decide guilt or innocence. Then that's where the decision is made about guilt or not guilt. That's not made at the grand jury stage. It's just preliminary. And so let me add this back and show you my next document on that. Give me just a second. So I want you to see what the Idaho rules are about grand jury and grand jury secrecy. First of all, the selection of the grand jury must take place in a closed session. This is selecting them, with a district judge, prosecuting attorneys, prospective jurors, court reporter, clerk of the court, and any required interpreter present. So that's the universe of people who are going to be present as the jury is selected. And now let's take a look. This is an oath that the grand juror has to agree to and has to swear to before they actually hear the evidence and then sit on the grand jury. And so this is the oath itself. And here's what I've marked off a section for you to think about: that you will keep your own counsel and that of the other members of the grand jury and of the government, and will not, except when required in the due course of judicial proceeding, disclose the testimony of any witness examined before you, nor anything which you or any other grand juror may have said, nor the manner in which you or any other grand juror may have voted in any matter before you, that you will present. And so the statement is, you're not going to go out and disclose what you heard, the testimony that you heard. You're not going to talk about how people voted. All of those things are going to be deemed to be confidential. And then I'll show you one more. This is another Idaho rule. This is 6.3, part 2, secrecy of proceedings and disclosure. Every member of the grand jury must keep secret whatever was said or done in the grand jury proceedings and the vote of each grand juror on a matter before them. But a grand juror, it may be required by the district judge to disclose matters under certain circumstances. But in general, it's considered to be secret. So, okay, let's think through then what this would mean.
But there is something that we have to talk about, and those are the new statements from Stephen Goncalves. Mr. Goncalves, for anybody who's been following this case, has been quite vocal with the media about this investigation since the news broke about the killing of his daughter, Kaylee. In fact, he would reveal certain things that we weren't entirely sure the authorities wanted him to share. And now he is coming out with more information regarding the wounds. And he's doing this in an interview with Fox News Digital. So let me bring in right now my good friend, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, who is also the host of the Body Bags podcast. Joseph, it's good to see you, and thanks for coming on again.
Good to see you, brother. How you doing?
So before we get into the wounds and the revelations about the wounds, I want to start here. So Stephen Goncalves told Fox News that he spoke with the coroner, Kathy Mabut. Apologies if I mispronounced her last name. Mm-hmm. First off, before we get into the wounds, is it typical for a coroner to share this information with the parent of a victim?
It depends upon the case. And yeah, I mean, I've certainly, in my past, working as a medical legal death investigator, have shared, some of the intimate details when asked specifically about it. However, I will say this. If there has ever been a multiple homicide case that I have worked, I've never done a compare and contrast relative to injuries that other victims have sustained to the wounds that, say, the immediate family is asking me about one victim. That's very bad form. And I can't imagine any coroner doing that.
I'm going to get into that, the comparison between Kaylee and the others. But this is what Stephen Goncalves told Fox News about what was told to him by the coroner. He says, She says, "Sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears, like this was a strong weapon, not like a stab." She said these things were big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something where you were going to be able to call 911. They were not going to slowly bleed out. What do you make of that?
I've never heard verbiage like that from anyone in the medical legal field, and I'll tell you why.
Wait, does that mean that he might be getting it wrong, or that there's something, if a coroner told this to him, something's off?
Yeah, something would be off, and I don't know, maybe he's not quite understanding what's being said, but he's using very specific language there, Jesse. Tears, let's just break it down real quick, all right? When you're using an edged weapon, tearing is not something that's associated with that, okay? Tearing creates this, where you have connective tissue or you have tissue bridging. Most of the time that's connected with lacerations, and lacerations are associated with blunt force trauma. The coroner's never mentioned anything about blunt force trauma. So I don't know if he's misunderstanding, misremembering, or just misstating. I don't know, but I do know this: you have two choices with sharp force injuries. You either have stabs, okay, or you have incised wounds, which are slices. Slices are longer than they are deep. Stabs are deeper than they are long. That's really your only two choices. Now, kind of an outlier in all of this is something we refer to as puncture wounds, which doesn't look anything like a stab wound. They're generally, kind of circular in shape. You see them with like people that have been stabbed with shanks, homemade shanks in prisons, or people that are impaled on rebar, that sort of stuff. Now, this tearing, it doesn't add up to me. It doesn't make sense whatsoever.
But we've been under the impression that it was a fixed blade knife that was used. There was reporting that it was a Rambo style knife. There was questions if it was a K-bar style knife. He said, Stephen Goncalves, that the knife slashed open Kaylee Goncalves's liver and lungs. Again, so are we thinking it's the wrong weapon based on this, or are we still of the conclusion it's a knife, but the characterization is a bit off?
Well, first off, I'm very sorry for this man's loss, but he's not the person I'm going to go to for an analysis of injuries. I'm still waiting to hear from the medical examiner, who I think or the forensic pathologist who was contracted to do these examinations over in Spokane. All right. Coroner, just so everybody knows, the coroner is not an MD here. She's certainly not a forensic pathologist. She didn't do these. These bodies would have been transferred over there. I don't understand from, the genesis of a lot of this information that he's putting out there. It doesn't make sense. And keep in mind as well, early on, do you remember back, I think that the coroner actually had a sit-down interview with our friend Ashley Banfield early on. And she was the first person to get to the coroner. And Ashley asked very specifically in that interview, she said, were any of these victims slashed? Because that goes to another part of criminal profiling and all that sort of stuff. And the coroner definitively said no. She said these were stab wounds, and they at least had one fatal stab wound that she could identify. Now, the coroner framed it in the sense where she talked about the chest. Okay. All right. He's saying, this father is saying liver. Liver ain't the chest. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's way south. You're talking about below the rib cage, essentially on the right aspect of the abdomen. So I don't really know, how they came to that conclusion. That doesn't make sense. And again, using this term, and I think using the term the liver was slashed, that's not what you would have in this case. It would be a stab. Remember, I gave the description of an incised wound just a moment ago. This is not an incised wound. This is a stab wound. Okay.
What do you make of when he says, like you mentioned, that Kaylee's wounds do not match to Mogan's wounds? So he said they may have individually died from the exact same thing, being stabbed, but there are more details. They're not even close to matching. Again, Do you think that this is a situation where perhaps he's misunderstanding what the coroner's saying, or is the coroner maybe providing conclusions that the coroner should not be making at this point?
Well, my default position again with this, Jesse, is what does the board certified forensic pathologist say about it?
And just to be clear, it is possible he's right.
It is possible that he is right, I would assume. However, what's the genesis for this? How does he assess that these injuries are different? Did he see this other victim's body? Was he the one drawing this conclusion?
I don't know how you catch a criminal if you don't even know what you're looking for.
This morning, Stephen Goncalves sharing his fear and frustration, not only facing the heartbreaking loss of his daughter Kaylee and her 3 friends, but the fact that their killer is still at large.
It's going to be a cold case if we don't do something within the next week or two.
Goncalves says he respects the need to withhold some information, but is frustrated by what he calls a lack of communication from law enforcement, leaving the father of 4 slowly losing his patience.
Every day that goes by and you don't hear anything, what does that do?
Just tells me statistically I'm going to have to do more work myself.
Three weeks and still no arrest in the murder of 4 friends, University of Idaho students who were brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus home. The parents of one of the girls killed have become increasingly outspoken on the case, now saying there is a, quote, conflicting means of death between their daughter and her friend. Joining us now for more is former FBI agent and former Navy SEAL Jonathan Gilliam. Jonathan, welcome back to Wake Up America. So let's start with that. What conflicting means of death mean? Autopsy results are already out. The father of one of those students says the points of damage don't match. What does he mean by this, you think?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know what this guy means. I'm going to take a little bit of a turn on this because this individual, Stephen Goncalves, I always butcher his last name. He's doing an interview. It seems like every 4 to 8 hours, and many of these different news agencies are putting what he has to say all over the airwaves, and they're not looking at the totality of the things that this guy says. He himself, not law enforcement, he says conflicting things constantly, and he says things that are very odd over and over again. I've worked a lot of different cases. I spoke to a lot of different law enforcement. In fact, one police officer who was a mayor of a town in Springfield and a 20-year police officer reached out to me yesterday and said he's never seen anyone that seemed like they have committed a homicide more than Mr. Goncalves. Now that's something when we're looking at his statements that he is consistently making to the media, and the media is overlooking the fact that he is saying things. And I have some of the things that he says right here. He says that nobody in the room, that it was fast and nobody suffered. Right?
Yeah,
there's been no report
that?
on that. He's also said that he's just going to say it. This is a quote from Kaylee's dad. I'm just going to say it. It was leaked to me. I earned that. I paid for that funeral. I sent my daughter to college. She came back in a box. He went to when they had their service for all the 4 slain and made jokes and talked about the lighting. I mean, this individual is bothering me and many people very much. And if at the very least, he is causing law enforcement more problems, I think, than anything else.
We don't avoid it. We don't talk about it. We all come together and spend time as a family, make sure that we're listening to everyone.
We actually really have not argued at all, really, I mean, I get little scared sometimes when him and Shannon start going on tyrants here and there, and I'm like, you guys are scaring me, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just, like you said, it's awkward, and it feels very, like, not normal. Like, you're not supposed to go call out the prosecutor or call out, you know? So, I mean, I'm like, ah!
It's my daughter.
Yeah,
Nobody tells me.
But, you know,
yeah.
I'm a scaredy cat when it comes to that kind of stuff, but I mean, I'll do it. Don't make me do it. I will get ugly, but I just can't.
99% of the time, it's all positive. It's just the times where you think maybe decisions being influenced by, pressures outside of what's best for the case, that you got to put your foot down and say, okay, if you don't want to share what's going on here, then we'll be forced to make a statement. We'll have to do what's best for our daughter. That we really have to take that stance.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody else that can do it at the same attention level that I think we can. Nothing against a prosecutor or anything, but I just don't know if they just can't be committed like a parent. You know, a parent is we're willing to do whatever we have to do. So
and maybe they are.
Yeah.
Maybe they are.
Were you surprised, Steve, to see the prosecution also now say that they don't want cameras?
I want to say yes, but I'm shocked at how many times the prosecution and the defendant are on the same page. And then there's some certain things that they have in common, and they rise up. They rise up over and over and over. I won't say them now, but if they keep rising up over my daughter's truth and justice, then I will just call them out on those commonalities that they
Emily, thank you. Meanwhile, newly unsealed court records show a battle between the attorney representing the Goncalves family, Shannon Gray, and the judge. According to documents, Gray doesn't believe he should have to follow the gag order, and he accused the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, of leaking information about the case to the media. And Gray is still fighting for himself and his clients to be allowed to speak freely about the case.
Turning now to the Moscow murder case, newly unsealed court documents are revealing even more disagreement among the attorneys involved, and that includes allegations of leaked information.
KREM 2 Shannon Mowdy combed through that document today and breaks down what we have learned. Shannon? Yeah, this memo summarizes a January 13th meeting held in chambers where the judge gave a stern reminder of her gag order. The judge was concerned after seeing media reports about the Moscow murder case, including details that shouldn't be public under that order. In the memo, we've learned about accusations of an information leak against one of the top attorneys in the case. This 3-page memo was unsealed, with the names of some witnesses and their attorneys redacted early this week. The closed-door meeting January 13th included those attorneys, the prosecutors, public defender, and Goncalves family attorney Shannon Gray.
It is an ordinary meeting to deal with an extraordinary circumstance.
Seattle trial lawyer Mo Hammoudi provided some context about why this meeting was held and why we're now seeing the summary unsealed.
You want this case either tried to a jury or resolved by way of a plea agreement once. Cases like this are not only expensive, but the victims' families will be damaged the longer it takes to get through this process.
Judge Megan Marshall called the meeting in response to what she was hearing and seeing in media reports of the case. Hammoudi says this was a stern reminder of the existing non-dissemination order and a warning for anyone who violated it.
There's real concern in this case about information being publicized before it is even introduced in a court of law.
The judge warned violators could be held in contempt and or reported to the Idaho State Bar. Hammoudi says punishments could range from attorneys being fined to having licenses suspended or even being disbarred.
Gray,
in the unsealed memo, Goncalves family attorney Shannon Gray claimed information is getting leaked from the prosecutor's office. Prosecutor Bill Thompson denied the allegations. Hammoudi says possible leaks could damage the ability to find a jury or try the case fairly.
Because for it to come into court, it has to be reliable, it has to be relevant, it has to be admissible, it has to meet criteria under the rules. So now you have a piece of information out there that may or may not come into evidence.
So what can we gather from the release of this document? Hammoudi says it shows the judge and attorneys are committed to protecting this highly publicized case, pointing out Thompson and Brian Kohberger's public defender, Ann Taylor, signed off on unsealing it.
First and foremost, can I just check in with you and ask how you're holding up?
There's been progress, and that always helps. I feel like we have a mission, we have a job to do, we have things that have to happen, and when I see those things happening, that helps me understand that we're going in the right direction, and that's always better than just sitting and waiting for who knows what's going to happen.
So when the official news dropped that the grand jury had convened, the process had completed, the indictment was coming down, what was your reaction?
They had let us know beforehand that this process was in action and it was going to possibly happen. They kind of put it in a vague circumstance saying it could be this case, but we knew. I have a legal counsel. I talked to my legal counsel. He said, yes, it's definitely this case. So we knew that this is a possibility. So we just sat back, hoped that everybody was going to remain quiet and it wouldn't leak, because the last thing we wanted was any of the families to be accused of that. So then we kept our mouth shut and we just waited for it to happen. And then they told us, yeah, it's over, it's done.
Well, we had been making big plans, as a network, decamping to Idaho for the June 26th hearing. It was my understanding there was going to be a solid 3 to 5 days, like a mini trial, and we would have learned a lot of information. I wanted to get your take, however, on the fact that we will not get that opportunity to learn some of these mysterious holes in this case. Is it troublesome to you? Is it bothersome to you? Or are you just happy that the process is continuing regardless of what kind of indictment we got?
No, I'm just like everyone else. I want to know exactly what's going on. I want to see all the evidence. I don't like the secrecy, like the hiding of it. but I understand why they did it. There's people who are witnesses and they need to be protected, and they don't need to be dragged through every obstacle that this process goes through. And it was a wise decision to go this path. So all the information will come out, but it doesn't have to come out in multiple times in multiple ways. And we don't have to make them go through this exercise more than needed.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Goncalves. Well, the first thing I want to note is right now we have zero evidence that there was actually communication between a grand juror, even in a roundabout way, to Steve Goncalves. In order for there to be an actual evaluation by a court, there would have to be a hearing. There would have to be evidence. Things would have to be presented. And a newspaper article's talk about it is not evidence. Now, knowing things that aren't public, but that actually are true. For example, if the Dickies purchase of the Dickies uniform is true, then, okay, that would be some evidence, because there would be no way for the public to know that. So how did that fact get out?
To go stargazing.
To go start. And
Yeah.
like we said, where's your stargazing app? You know?
Hi guys, Ali Duzette here, and today is day 11 of the November 2022 Eclipse Portal. You can, if you're just starting with us now, we're in the middle of this Eclipse Portal, and if you want to, you can go back and start from the beginning and just do all the tapping scripts, and they'll still be helpful, and they'll still be helpful after this Eclipse Portal is over, so there's no need to worry about doing them all at once. But during Eclipse Portals, we have an extra chance to get more healing done than we normally would. And so I like to just make these series so that we can just blast through whatever we can during this special time. So today is a really interesting day because we get to see the Taurids meteor shower. The southern Taurids will be taking place today and tomorrow. The northern Taurids will be on November 12th and 13th. And it's rare to have two separate flows of this, apparently. So that's kind of cool.
If you're out there, you got this this app that identifies these stars that you're staring at. Don't play us like fools. Don't just expect us to think you're just walking around clicking at the sky.
Well, that's when the reasonable nature of a juror comes in, right? Like, what's reasonable to you? Is that reasonable? You know, does that really sound like your gut feels good about that? And jurors are usually pretty good at that stuff. Go back to something you mentioned about, I think you said someone reached out to you who had taken one of Brian Kohberger's Reddit questionnaires. Is that true?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
We actually got a letter on that one, and then in the letter was a number to call. This individual said that they had been called. They got the Reddit. Somebody called to survey them on crimes, and he was like, I felt like I was getting set up by the cops. So I was just like, I answered it kind of like over the top. He's like, I kind of embellished some stuff, kind of pulling the cop's leg, hung up. This guy calls me back a couple days later, and we start talking again. And he goes, and I start feeling like this guy's like enjoying how I was describing how I was getting away with, like how I selected my victims. And he said, so I told him, you know, I knew these neighborhoods that had a lot of money, and somebody might drink a little too much wine. Somebody might make a call to 911 over a noise complaint. Somebody goes to jail. And when that male went to jail, I'd go to that house, surveil it. And if it looked like there was somebody in that house that was passed out, I would go rob that house. And that's how he picked his victims, I would say. And he would rob them from jewelry, and I don't know what you do nowadays. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but maybe cash or something. But he would rob them. He said that Brian seemed to enjoy his story, called him a couple times. He said he was so odd about it that when this case came forward, he was like, I know exactly what this is about. I'm going to reach out, and maybe he's pulling my leg. There's been plenty of people who have sent us stuff that weren't accurate, but it always stuck with me. It already stuck. There's certain things that stick with you. That one was one of them, and there's other stuff that other letters that we've given back to the prosecution and said, we don't even know what to do with this, and they've taken it. So
that was my next question. You shared that with prosecutors. They were interested to hear from these people.
Yeah, I don't know where it goes from there, but yeah, we've definitely given them the letters, and it's kind of a.
You've said that this stands out because of reports before from the Reddit survey that Brian Kohberger sent out, as a criminology student, asking other criminals about their methods. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, we got a letter, and it had a phone number in there, and we called this individual, and he said he had been interviewed by Brian. And he got the sense that Brian was getting off on his story. And his story was basically he'd listen to a police scanner, wait for somebody to call the police on a domestic violence type thing. And then the male would be arrested. And then he would go into those neighborhoods, and that would be the house that he would rob.
To WW, my star, my perfect silence. WW. I mean, who you figure that is, yeah? Woodrow Wilson? Willy Wonka? Walter White?
You got me. Kind of like it just seems like it's a dead end. You never hear again. I was hoping I'd get my letter back, but no, we never got anything back. And I've never seen anything like that in the list of evidence. So it probably turned out to be nothing.
Interesting.
Fantastic. I do want to quickly ask you about your new book, Framed, with Jim McCloskey, which dives into 10 true stories about wrongly convicted individuals. Was there any one thing in researching this and studying this that jumped out to you as just a jaw dropper of how the system fails people?
No, there's not one thing. There are a couple of common themes. Bad police work is where it starts. And the police are under enormous pressure to get a conviction, clear the case, and move on to the next case. the breakdown comes with your prosecutors but oftentimes the police will hide evidence from a prosecutor.
Right.
And so the prosecutor doesn't have everything, and we don't know this for 15 years. It takes a long time to find the truth. But I'd say prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct are the common themes that you find in every wrongful conviction case. And then you have the other causes like bad science, bad forensics, improper identification procedures, lying jailhouse snitches is a huge problem with incentivized witnesses, incentivized informants who get paid or get time knocked off for testifying. There are bad defense lawyering, judges who are just asleep at the switch, and that's what frustrates me because when I grew up as a lawyer, we had great judges, and having a fair trial was what everybody wanted, and we had fair trials. Holding room, which is next to the death room, chamber room. The holding room is the last place the condemned man stops to have a word with his minister or his advisor or his lawyer. And the chaplain is often the one who would spend the last moments with the condemned man, just moments before he's gassed. And the chaplain was a retired Southern Baptist minister. And we were talking, it was very gloomy, it was cold and rainy outside, it was the perfect setting for a conversion. And he said, Mr. Christian, are you a Christian? I said, I am a Christian. He said, do you think Jesus approves of what we do here? There's no way to say yes.
No.
There's no way to say yes. Jesus didn't teach retribution, he taught forgiveness.
Right. Thou shalt not kill is pretty much,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, no, he would not approve of this. He said, you're right. He said, this is not right what we do here. He said, killing people is not what Christians believe, or most people believe. And he said, if we can all agree that killing is wrong, why and how is the state allowed to kill? And at that moment I said, that makes perfect sense.
What's it like? I've wondered when I've seen you guys, what is it like being in the courtroom? Because I think everybody feels strange in there because it's such a small space.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's not as big as the case. It's so puny. It's so small. It's hard to realize something this big, and you're in this little goofy courtroom that seems like it's a prop, almost like a prop in a small movie or something.
It's one of those diagrams, and they're looking from out above, and you're flicking people off and driving a little car. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it is. The worst part, obviously, is being in the same room with him and to sit here and look at this. I don't know what he is. To look at this thing and know what he has done. And I mean, like I said, you could make your own details up, and like you mentioned earlier, you usually go into court and trial, and shit starts getting dropped. And you start being like, oh, I know what's going to happen.
It's not like the movies.
I cannot even imagine I cannot even imagine what we're going to hear. And I mean, that is none of what I'm looking forward to, you know, wanting this to happen. And I don't know. I don't know if he's ever going to speak. It makes me sick that he sits there in his suits,
yeah,
and he sits there and taps his hands, and you're just sitting there, and he, you know, sits there and rocks back and forth in the chair, and I'm thinking, why is he sitting in a big old judge chair? Put him in a chair, you know. I don't know why he's sitting in such a big, comfortable chair and all dressed up in a fresh haircut. And I've looked it up. Never seen another murderer or whatever he is convicted. Up to this point of a case, not in handcuffs, not in shackles, one or the other, or both, and in orange. I don't understand why he's sitting there.
Pre-trial.
Pre-trial, yeah.
Yeah, usually it's just during, like, with the jury there.
Yeah, because that's where they're biased. That's where they could be formed a bias.
And I'll tell you what. I do feel differently about the way there is, because, I mean, there is a different light that I feel shed on me when I walk past the TV or something, and his face will be on our screen or something, and when he's wearing orange versus like the original ones where he's in orange with his hair on the back of his neck and him all cleaned up. Not that I think he's nice looking or anything by all means, but it's
one's more like a business activity versus
two different people.
A criminal.
And they're just giving, you know, and I'm just like, okay, and they're afraid that we're gonna, you know, we're talking or saying something and gonna ruin the case, but you guys are letting him
portray himself.
Yeah, portray himself like this upperclassman and not bring him in wearing shackles or at least a pair of shackles around his.
We're just looking at the pictures of the people we should be talking about tonight. Your daughter, Kaylee, her best friend, Maddie, Xana in the far right there on the bottom right, and Ethan, her boyfriend. You know, maybe it's not coincidental, Steve, that all of this flurry of activity recently in the Idaho House overwhelmingly passed legislation that would make the firing squad the first method of execution, not the backup method, not the choice, but the first method of execution, which I think would send shivers down the spine of Brian Kohberger tonight, knowing that his case is so much harder to win. Do you follow the news of the firing squad and the plans for Idaho?
I don't follow it. I help make it. I'm talking to some of these individuals in the state of Idaho. We're definitely being out there. If they need somebody to sit in front of a camera and take a little bit of time to help identify what, I hate to say a victim, but somebody going through this, and to rally support around a law. And you don't know it until you go through it, man. This is real, and it's ugly. And when somebody kills you while you're in your bed, you haven't done anything to deserve it. And I'll be that person. I'll be that person to stand in front of the camera and drum up some support. And yes, Bruce is the main guy behind the last Bill 37 here in Idaho. So yeah, I've reached out to him. I've spoken with him. I've spoken with even others before and after. And it doesn't even just end in Idaho. I mean, there's other things in the works where maybe some of these individuals don't even stay in the state. Maybe he can keep being a drifter, and we can drift him right on to El Salvador or one of these other locations where they can host these monsters, and they can be around the people that they look up to.
Steve, I'm happy for you and your family that you got this news today. You deserve good news. You've been waiting a long time. You've been patient. This is nothing anyone can imagine if they're not walking in your shoes. So thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you. And keep me posted on your efforts. As you said, you're speaking to politicians and those who are making this change. Keep us posted on your efforts. Appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
You mean the court process feels very out of control?
It's terrible.
You got to stack up your vacation time, because the speedy trial, we weren't sure. So, I stacked up my vacation.
We got close.
We thought that there was got to be a little bit of a chance. I didn't think there was, but she was hoping for it.
I was hoping. I was like, no. I think we're gonna. I mean, when they scheduled those dates, I was like, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And Shannon's like, it ain't gonna happen.
Well, I was just thinking today with everything they were talking about, how could they have ever done it? Like there was so much.
It would have been some would argue benefit could have been because those FBI agents in there working today is more evidence.
And I get that. And I have a good friend, my cousin, family member, and he tells me, you know, he knows a lot about the legal system and whatnot. And he tells me, Chrissy, it's actually a good thing because it just gives them more time. They're not just going to sit there and do nothing. They're going to continue to investigate. Things are going to continue to fall in their laps. Tips are going to continue to come in. And I'm just like, I don't want to hear that. Like, I want to see this guy die. Like, I don't want him breathing any longer. Because they say, oh, he's living in hell already. No, he's not. Not the hell that I think of. The hell that I think of is literally terrifying, agonizing torture day in and day out. I don't care. Latah County Jail is not agonizing. That is not hell.
Like people to have compassion for all the sufferers, for the victims of crime, for the families of victims, the family of the incarcerated, whether they're innocent or not. There are innocent family members who have people in prison in their families.
And so I went to America instead.
And what was your first experience of death row like? Can you talk me through like what was going through your mind when you walked and met those prisoners? And
Oh, I remember it very vividly. It was a place called Reedsville,
Yeah.
Georgia, where the Georgia State Prison was. I was down visiting people on death row when I was about 20. And look, it was the summer of my second year of college and university in America. And really, I was only useful for one thing, which was to go visit the prisoners. And I remember I was going into Reedsville, Georgia State Prison, and I was thinking, what am I going to talk to these guys about? And why do they want to talk to me? I mean, it must be miserable on death row, and here am I coming in to talk about my incredibly fortunate life. And I went in, and it was just great. I mean, you know, most of my best friends over the years have been people on death row, let's face it. This notion that you shouldn't have an emotional attachment to your clients, just stupid. Of course you should.
I know some lawyers take the approach that you don't have a relationship. Why do you think that that's a nice way to approach it? What is it about?
Oh, how nice, nice. I'm not sure nice is the word I'd use for it. No, it's because it's the only human way to do it. When you're representing someone in front of a jury, if you don't like them, or if you're not friends with them, that's going to come across. And I normally would spend about 3 years preparing for a trial because it takes a lot of work. And by then you've really got to know the person. And we are all better than our worst 15 minutes.
Yeah. How are you, I mean, how are you guys doing? Like, I mean, the last time I saw you in court, Olivia was there with your granddaughter. I mean, how are they doing? I'm sure in some ways, like, life has to go on. You have some positive things happening too with your granddaughter. Like how's everybody doing?
In some ways, we're in a pause of a movie. Like, you can just go forward, but you just got to keep rewinding because you don't know what you've missed and all these facts. So it's no way to live. It's no way to be. And we try to treat our children different than what we're going through. It's my responsibility to hold this individual accountable for what he's done to my family. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking. That's why this is happening right here, right now. It's not because I care about anything other than justice. And that's why I'm pushing for cameras. That's why I'm pushing for this, because I'm a biased man. I'm a biased father.
And I thought when I started that project that it'd be really hard to prove many, but you begin by looking at the last words. And if your last words were, "I'm really sorry I killed 6 people," probably not. But a huge number, the last words, my favorite was this guy in Missouri, whose last words were, "You're about to execute an innocent person and you can kiss my ass." But a huge number said something to the effect that you're about to kill an innocent person, and that's not because they're making it up. And as we've looked at these cases and done the investigation post-mortem that should have been done when they were still alive, and then we'll put it on TV and that, we can prove a huge number of innocent people were killed, and that's what's going to stop the death penalty.
Cameras, the story sort of goes away, the town doesn't look as bad. Without the house, you know, you don't have to think about it every day. The school can go back to normal. Like, do you think it's all connected, or do you think it really is just sort of legal? Like, both sides just don't want the cameras for the legal reasons?
100%. The reason I'm talking to you right here, right now, is because there is capital business decisions being made on top of justice systems. So no, there is no way to pretend like these all equal and they all equate to the same motivation. Somebody's going to lose, and it isn't going to be my daughter.
What are the biggest threats to human rights at the moment for us?
If you look around Europe to all of your populist leaders, and you've got Meloni in Italy, you've got Viktor Orbán in Hungary, all of these people playing on hatred. And that's classic, isn't it? It's what politicians do when they don't have any ideals. And so you got Trump in America, and it's so easy to get people to hate. And it's actually not so easy to get people to be decent to each other. But what the powerful people do is always play the poor people off against each other so that no one notices they're the problem. And that's the essence of the politics of fear and the politics of hatred.
And we have the resources to do that. So I don't know what removing the cameras really provides other than a gap. You know, and we've had a gag order in this case, and that didn't work out well. You know, you hear about other people who've been placed under a gag order. It doesn't seem that the Constitution works well with this constitutional time of when it's okay to speak about, I don't know, I don't want to say the truth, but I want to say when people are going to speak about a case and let the audience decide what the truth is, you know.
I do feel differently about the way there is, because, I mean, there is a different light that I feel shed on me when when I walk past the TV or something and his face will be on our screen or something. And when he's wearing orange versus like the original ones where he's in orange with his hair on the back of his neck and him all cleaned up. Not that I think he's nice looking or anything by all means, but it's
one's more like a business activity versus
two different people.
A criminal.
And they're just giving, and I'm just like, okay, and they're afraid that we're gonna, we're talking or saying something and gonna ruin the case, but you guys are letting him
portray himself.
Yeah, portray himself like this upperclassman and not bring him in wearing shackles or at least a pair of shackles around his. It makes me sick that he sits there in his suits.
Yeah.